Yeah, so the Teeth EP, that's exactly how it was intended, really. We just had a couple of songs, and we just liked the idea of doing an EP, I think, instead of going on and doing another full album. We probably weren't feeling particularly inspired to write lots of songs at the time, but we wanted to put something out, which is also why we re-recorded a couple of the older songs with what we thought of as our new sound, that kind of much more sludgy sound that we'd evolved. And yeah, we should, with hindsight, I often wonder if we shouldn't have just saved those two songs and put them on the next album. But that would have then meant writing another 10 songs and making an album. So, and we were always way too lazy to do anything sensible like that. Yeah, Creep Diets. I like Creep Diets. Nearly all of it. Just a little bit more experimental in places, I suppose. But the actual sound of the album, I always thought we didn't quite nail it sonically. There's a Japanese mastering of it. The Japanese remastered it, and their version actually sounds a lot better. But of course, there's not that many of those about. And the video for Grey, well, there are actually two videos for Grey. There's one that we got done off our own bat with our friends Video Core, who used to come along and video bands and then give them the tape kind of thing, and they were really nice people, and they made us a great video, which is the one with lots of black and white found footage in it, and all those machine presses and things, and we thought that worked really well. But then MTV said that it wasn't broadcast quality. And yet again, pressure was brought to bear, and we were forced to make another video of us, pretending to play in a ruined abbey. It's like we were trying to pile every metal cliche we possibly could in there. And I don't like that video very much. I don't think anyone does, but the Video Core one seems to be a lot more prevalent on YouTube, so hopefully that's how that song will be remembered. Other than that, I guess my favourite song on that album would be Face Down, which again we played live a bit, but then not much after that, because it never went down that well. I thought it was the best song on the album, but what do I know? Obviously not very much.
You just heard Teeth from the Teeth EP from Fudge Tunnel from 1992, and also Face Down from Fudge Tunnel's Creep Diets from 1993. This is Fudge Tunnel Part 2, Requiem Metal Podcast. I am Mark.
And I am Jason. It's not often you get to say Fudge Tunnel Part 2 in your life.
I know.
Mark. It sounds like a colonoscopy Part 2.
Hey, I had one this year, so it's
there you go.
It's all good.
Yeah, we decided to break this up. We, based on some recommendations we've gotten from, Brian Wendorf sort of said, hey, kind of break it up maybe into 2 parts. And sometimes we release them in the same week, like we did with the Chasm. This one, I think we're going to kind of space out a little bit.
Yeah, like nobody wants the 8 hours in 1 week.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
Give people some time to digest. And I think Part 2 is going to be a lot shorter. There's a lot less scholarship probably on this era of the band, but that's okay. We're going to have a lot less of the Alex clips that we had in Part 1, but we get to hear from Albert from Decibel and Nick Green from Decibel, and we'll get a lot more kind of interview clips from some of the other guys too from the band, which I'm pretty excited for. So, but yeah, what you got there is, Teeth EP. It was from 92. It was basically just a 4-song EP. 2 songs were from the Pig Boy comp. Pig Boy was their old label that we talked about before, that had just come out around that time, called Fudge Cake. And so I think they were trying to beat Pig Boy to the punch by putting a couple of those songs out on Earache, if that makes kind of sense. And then 2 like kind of new songs, including that title track. And title track's very much like a kind of a full speed ahead kind of sludgy doom kind of thing. And Adrian's really like crashing the boards on the drums in a really cool way. That's where I kind of start to notice a lot of like, so the Dale Crover just beat the shit out of the drum kit kind of approach.
Yeah, I believe this is where Newport starts doing co-production as well.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell like there's a little bit more of a sonic quality in some ways to the guitars, even more so than what you heard on Hate Song, and you'll hear it certainly on Creep Diets and a lot.
Yeah, the guitars are pushed up in the mix. The bass is pushed down in the mix,
which is kind of unfortunate. They lose some of that post-punk vibes a little bit.
I think that's one of their most, because the bass isn't really distorted either, which I think is really something that really benefits like heavy music, is to not have a distorted bass and distorted guitar.
Yeah,
kind of fills in that middle space a little more.
Although one thing that's cool about David's bass in this tune is halfway through, like around the 155 mark of Teeth, he does some I noticed some kind of cool, kind of tasty licks that I didn't really hear on the earlier stuff. So maybe like the cleaner production that you're getting a little bit, it's less kind of like noisy. You can kind of start to hear kind of more intricacies like that. I don't know. So it's like a trade-off, I guess.
Yeah, I think the drums have even more of a live sound than they did before too. There's not quite as much. It seems like it's more, everything is kind of opened a little bit more.
Yes, yeah. That's that bombast, that Crover kind of Melvin's Houdini kind of style or whatever. And the riffing is really interesting. I was kind of trying to figure out what it reminded me of, and obviously these guys do remind me of so many other bands I was listening to in that era. But in particular, I think the tone that I get on this, and I notice it a little bit more through Creep Diets and sometimes in Futility of Ignorance, is like that Pepper Keenan kind of like COC Blind, COC Deliverance kind of like quality, whatever that is, that thickness. Like the Melvins had it, sure, but there's a little bit more warmth to like the riffing here, and that's something I associate more with kind of the southern qualities that like Pepper. It
might even be like double track guitars too.
Could be, yeah, it could be. But that was something I kind of noticed there, and then Face Down, the first of a handful of tunes we're going to be hearing from Creep Diets. This is sort of our introduction to their kind of Columbia debut, Creep Diets, which Albert will talk a little bit more about before we go into the next set of music and stuff. Big riffs, lots of quiet, loud dynamics, which they're definitely going to glean from another Boston band. We made the Boston, Massachusetts connection in Part 1. And of course, that's the Pixies. And we'll actually be hearing the Pixies in this next set of music, because Alex in particular, when he was reflecting on Hate Songs, talked about the Pixies and said, I wasn't actually able to master the Pixies kind of dynamic until Creep Diets. That's when I finally was able to understand how those sort of quiet, loud sort of thing worked in the proper way. And you get a little bit of it.
The quiet, loud that's kind of wasn't that the Pixies documentary title?
I think so. Yeah.
But also in Creep Diets, he's actually doing all the production himself.
Oh, is he? Okay, no Colin at all. Got it.
No, this is all him now.
I love in Face Down. I love the cool ass kind of rhythmic breakdown around the like 255 mark. I said it reminds me of like kind of the same part that you got and work with me here. This might be a kind of a weird place. That Iggy Pop moment in White Zombie Black Sunshine, where Iggy's kind of talking over the song.
You got the talkie bits.
Yeah, but like the riff reminds me of the same riff you hear in Black Sunshine. And White Zombie's an interesting sort of contemporary because, they were emerging in 92, 93, at the same time that this is coming out. And I doubt like they were influencing each other in any way. They were just all part of that alt metal groove, like all of that was sort of happening. And so they're bound to be some kind of crossover there. But I think what makes it different than say like White Zombie is like you've got like that cool little breakdown, but it's also bathed in this kind of noisy sheen that like Helmet would do on like Milk Toast or Houdini, from the Melvins, or even like Jesus Lizard Goat and stuff like that. So just, even though they're in Columbia and even though they're like, technically they have more mainstream access, it's like Fudge Tunnel's still not going to make it easy for people to like them or to be able to like access them. They're going to that's kind of what I love about like Melvin's Houdini, right? Is Melvin's Houdini on the surface. And you could say the same thing about the record after that too. Those first two records that came out on, Columbia.
Stoner Witch.
Yeah. And actually Alex Newport had a lot to do with Stag too, which is kind of interesting. The third record in that sort of, I think he did some production for it and maybe even played some things with him. But like Houdini on the surface, it's got Kurt Cobain as one of the producers, which of course in 93, oh my God, that's like a real big deal. And it's like that album, like you wanted to buy it and hope that it was going to be like kind of in the essence of Nirvana. And yeah, there's like some DNA there, but at every moment they can, the Melvins just fuck with you and don't allow you to be able to like enjoy that record as like a pop record or as like a catchy thing. And I love it about it. Like it's so subversive, like they'll give you a catchy chorus, but then like there's no words that you're actually singing, in that opening cut on Houdini Hooch. It's like they're nonsense words, and that's the point. Buzz
was their last major label, wasn't that Prick?
I don't know if that was major label or not. That might have been the one that gets them off the major label.
That was the one that was like their fuck you record.
Yeah, it was like a lot of noise and stuff like that. I mean, that's the thing. Like Houdini's still a great record. It's still a fucking fantastic metal album, and it's got riffs for days. But it's like people going into that. I loved the kids that like bought it because they heard Kurt Cobain was part of it, and then they just were like sad after they heard it. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what Fudge Tunnel is. Fudge Tunnel is like that band you buy hoping it's going to be this grunge thing, kind of like Alex talked about in the end of part one. And like it's sad because you're like, oh, this is way heavier and way noisier than what I expected,
Yeah.
And Nirvana kind of did that too a year in the same year, 93, like with In Utero. They purposely like made that like a fuck you record to people that only wanted Nevermind Part 2. It was just full of noisy parts and Albini's just like blasting certain things at people. And I remember a lot of my friends in high school who loved Nirvana because of like their ballads almost or whatever, like couldn't handle that record. And we were already into like death metal. So we're like, yeah, fuck yeah. It's noisy and angry. And like, I'm here for it, So that's kind of how I think of Creep Diets in sort of that kind of way. And I think Face Down is like an encapsulation of some of that, Was Creep Diets a big record for you and Chris? I know we talked about this at the beginning of part one, but because of its Columbia associations, did you guys care about this record as much as you did Hate Songs? Or
not that I remember. It was fine. I mean, listen to it in retrospect, it's actually quite good.
Yeah.
It's more refined, but back then I think we were onto other stuff at that point.
Yeah.
This was just like an iteration of, of other things. I think we're more into the more underground, Swedish stuff or Finnish stuff or whatever it might have been at the time.
Yeah, because I think you guys were moving off of that first wave of like that alt metal stuff, like probably, like you said, Solemn 69 or maybe Pretty Hate Machine or the first Helmet or, those prong records. And like you guys were like, oh, that stuff was cool, but I'm not really here for like the next record from those bands.
Yeah, that was just something cool that was like, peripherally interesting as far as heavy music was concerned.
And what's really funny for me is 93 is like 8th grade and 9th grade. It's like, spring of my 8th grade year, fall of my freshman year. I'm here for those bands' second records. Like those second records from all those bands are the gateway drugs for me into those bands. And so like for me, I didn't hear, the first, Strap It On from Helmet. I heard Meantime, and then I went back to Strap It On and, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I didn't know about Gish until after I got Siamese Dream. And, so I'm in a completely different spot and I probably would have fucking loved Creep Diets. That's the weird part. Like I should have had this record. It would have been listened to the same way, like that all my friends were listening to this type of music at the time,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Danzig 3, Danzig 4, COC Blind, COC Deliverance, all that shit. It was all like on our radar screen. And I don't know, it's just really weird that I think the cover really turned us off. That kind of Venus flytrap looking thing, like the pink on it. I don't know. There was just something
the spatter logo and stuff too.
Yeah, it was just like unattractive to us in a way where like, I don't know. Like I think I was also scared of like old Sonic Youth record covers because they just looked so like lo-fi. I was like, that's going to sound like shit. You know what I mean? Like I remember like having those unconscious thoughts where like, nah, that's probably not recorded very well. And that meant something to me then. I don't know. And
I remember seeing like the fucking washing machine cover. I was like, this looks stupid.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess I was thinking more like Evil. I was thinking like if Evil Washing Machine came out after I was already into the band, so I knew what it was. But like I would see like those like mid 80s, like pre Daydream Nation, album covers and be like, that looks rough. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was weird. It failed to capitalize on Columbia's exposure. Kind of was, like you said, kind of considered a failure commercially, even if the band was kind of accused of selling out. I feel like that's such a weird place to be. Like you didn't sell out enough to actually sell out, but like you also like lost street cred. It's like a terrible middle ground place to be.
But also everything else was all death metal bands.
Yeah, I know. And to me, it was Earache. It was their marketing campaign. It wasn't really the band, This should have been
absolutely.
I mean, this should have been more aligned with like what was going on with like Rollins' band at the time with Weight and Helmet, Tool, Quicksand, Therapy, Prong, all those other alt metal acts. Like, I just don't know why it wasn't marketed to those people. Like, people like me should have known about this. I was going to go and buy Prong Cleansing and things like that, Quicksand and Therapy. And I should have been buying fucking Fudge Tunnel too. But
I think Columbia was marketing all that stuff as like all extreme, extreme shit.
That's true.
They didn't like really differentiate any of it. It was all like, this is like the earache heavy thing. Like it wasn't like, oh, here's this that's kind of this way and this is this way. It was totally, I don't think they really thought about it that much.
Yeah, and I think they also like there's just still that je ne sais quoi that Fudge Tunnel had where like they didn't conform to the expectations of what people like thought of them. They had too much of the anti-commercial kind of big black flag, fuck you, we don't care, to like have become the next grunge band, that everybody expected them to be. They just were never built for that. That was just not what they were going to kind of be.
There's very few bands that were built for that.
No. It's why it just doesn't happen. It's like there's always like kind of hype and the hype machine kind of like wears off. I mean, the name, if you've never seen it before, it's worth watching. I have it on DVD, but there was a documentary about the whole Seattle thing called Hype. And it's really good. And it kind of gets into like where it all kind of like went off course, and there were really good bands that got like destroyed because they got like lumped in too much with like the Seattle scene almost to a fault or whatever, or they were marketed to be this, and they never should have been that, and it's only like people discovering them like in decades later, as like these undiscovered gems,
like Tad.
Yeah, Tad's kind of part of that too, yeah, but you think of like these classic stories, like, the Rodriguez story, where it's like, why didn't fucking people get this at the time? It's just like wrong place, wrong time, kind of thing. So,
well, plus a lot of these scenes they're made up of, there's really not a scene of like-minded bands. These are just the bands that happen to be around, and they try to make, Alice in Chains was really more of a hard rock band. They get, pushed into that whole kind of thing, and
yeah, they draw like a geographic line around them and say, all right, you do this thing, and we're going to market
like
this.
Pearl Jam was more like a classic rock band.
Yeah, they were coming more of the Doors and Grateful Dead and some of that kind of stuff, jam band kind of stuff.
Yeah, like if you really like, everything was a little louder than what was happening, but before that, it was just all cock rock shit. Which is like kind of basically just kind of pushing on the whole like glam scene from the 70s in a really uninspired way.
Well, I think that leads to like the song that we're going to open up this whole set for. And I think Gray, in a lot of ways, is probably the band's biggest chance to cross over. Yeah. Catchy hook, great main riff, killer bass lines, the whole thing. And I just said,
it's Fugazi, man.
Yeah, it's got a lot of that. It's got a little like Clutch, Monster Magnet, Caius, all those kind of those elements there. And I said perhaps it was just a little too noisy and weird for that crowd, to sort of have grabbed onto. I already said this. I said, I wonder how I missed this ? And here's what I said that I mentioned in part 1. I said, this feels like the Mount Pleasant skateboard crowd would have loved it, so
totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's like so much to love about this record.
Yeah, you've got that fierce, noisy part at 2:30 before all of a sudden it goes into this like Nirvana meets like here's a name I didn't think I would say on our podcast, but it totally sounds like the best parts of a John Frusciante solo. There's a lot to hate on Red Hot Chili Peppers, but like,
well, he's the best part of that band.
Well, he and Flea are like, they're good musicians. Like they know what they're doing and stuff, but like, you can hear some of that John Frusciante kind of style in here. And do I think that Fudge Tunnel and Alex is a fan? Fuck no, it's just an accident. But
yeah.
But again, they're all sort of like playing in the same circles, so there's going to bound to be like a kind of a little bit of a crossover sometimes. It's great. And when that solo kind of happens and that Gray chorus comes back big at like the 3:20 mark, as you're going to hear in a moment here, I said it's like a tsunami. It's just like this great like. It's those moments that define the early 90s alt metal, big label kind of stuff. And it just never caught me in my crowd. And I think that speaks volumes, the fact that I'm the target audience of this record and I didn't know it. And something's wrong there, right? Like something got lost in the marketing campaign or what they did with Headbangers or whatever. Because like me, Grindcore Coon, all of that crew that I kind of went to high school with, like we should have been buying this record at the same time we were buying Sky Valley. Like what the fuck? So
I think this is probably their best single they ever did.
Yeah, it's a fantastic song, and I forgot how good it was until we pulled this stuff out. Yeah. So get a great, definitely like a Sonic Youth inspired ending with sort of bubbling noise and growing kind of feedback and all that kind of stuff too. Then you get Tipper Gore that we're going to hear. And this is just definitely a fuck you to Tipper and the PMRC. A lot of the interviews I read.
Do what I say, not what I do.
Yeah. Do what I say, not what I do. That's for a band that like doesn't like do much with lyrics. That's one of the most clear lyrics that I'm able to pull out of them.
Yeah.
But I did run across a lot of interviews with Alex and the guys, and they were kind of talking about how they're talking a lot about censorship, and even though they were a British band, they were feeling the sort of effects of like the PMRC Tipper Gore stuff, even across the Atlantic a little. And it's interesting because British bands usually weren't commenting on that kind of stuff, but it was mostly like, American hardcore bands and hair metal bands and stuff that were kind of speaking out.
Even that Vice stuff, there's a lot of, the UK is really known for, like the Filthy 15 for movies and stuff that when you look back at what those are, like, Evil Dead 2, like, are you kidding me? Like,
Clockwork
so
Orange
much
was
worse
banned forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Than that. Like, I think there's a larger history of censorship in the UK that we're really, or
I think so too. Yeah,
we have it in the United States, absolutely for sure. It goes in waves, but ultimately, it's not quite as archaic as the UK seems.
Yeah, yeah,
or as arbitrary as some of that stuff seems.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so Tipper Gore is just like kind of a standard sort of tune. I mean, this is sort of a weird, I don't know how you feel about this record. It always sort of felt top heavy. I really like the first half of the record. I really, really dug. And I don't have a lot of thoughts or memories about a lot of the songs in the second half. I'm not a huge fan of the title track in particular. That one doesn't seem to really grab me. Always is it has some moments. Hot Salad, I kind of remember, but really those like first 5 or 6 tunes, like that's what like I kind of always go back to on here. I don't know if you
I feel like it's too long.
Or you think so? And maybe that's why I don't know like those later those later songs that well.
Or I was just like, okay, I feel like I already heard it.
Yeah, it's like pretty samey in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I feel even more that way on the next record.
That's an interesting thought, and
because it's more like cohesive as far as songwriting is concerned, but as far as like what's being offered, it I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that when we get.
I can see that. I kind of get what you're saying for sure. But we're still in the first half here with 10%, and 10%. This is I wrote if Helmet Fugazi and the Pixies had a baby. This is what 10% would be.
Totally that start riff that keeps going back and forth. Yeah,
it's ultra catchy, mid pace number. It's not like a super fast or aggressive or whatever. I wrote that the problem
building part in the center is pretty sweet though. Like the just the snare drum kind of like marching band thing that's going on.
Yeah,
then the bass kind of leads in back to the original riff.
That might be the part where I was thinking like kind of Fugazi-ish a little.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's like labyrinthian or kind of like, kind of walks you around in some places. I just wrote the problem with Creep Diets is its samey consistency. Yeah. Oh, look at my next note, Mark. But I love the midsection rhythmic bass noise side quests that each song seems to embrace. That's what I started calling them. Like to me, Fudge Tunnel, the essence of Fudge Tunnel is the side quest. Like they're always doing the same thing on every song, but it's what happens like in the middle or at the end of the song where they just like, let's just fucking go over here. Let's go do this fucking thing over here. And we're going to play around here.
Haze into madness or.
Yeah. And maybe we'll come back. Maybe we'll come back to structure. Maybe we won't. And like, that's the band. And either you like that or you don't. And I can see where some people are like, it's not for me. It's not like I can listen to a little bit of that, but after a while, it's not like what I crave,
Yeah, and I always liked this stuff, but it wasn't like go-to because I was always looking for that next thing.
Yeah.
At that age, you're always looking for like, okay, what's heavier, what's faster, what's whatever,
Sure.
It's
yeah.
Kind of like
a little more instant gratification kind of stuff. And I don't think like, listening to all the stuff that Alex guided us through in part 1, and even some of the certainly a lot of the clips that we didn't play, all the art theory that really went into this. Like he was way more intellectual about a band called Fudge Tunnel than most people would have assumed. And I think that's something you have to kind of consider when you kind of listen to it, that, I don't know if I can speak for the other two guys, but based on their record collections, I think they were all like into like, for as much as they love like Led Zeppelin and Sabbath and Cream and these kind of core hard rock proto metal bands or whatever, they also, all the stuff we played in part 1, they're really into a lot of like underground, like indie post rock goth, all that, all that foundational stuff, So, and I think the song we're going to kind of end, we're going to play a Pixies tune, Vamos, which he is going to comment on here from Surfer Rosa, which is kind of their masterpiece kind of record from 88. And again, you're going to get that quiet, loud. But one of the things that's really cool, and Alex will even mention it by name, is he sort of calls it an anti-solo guitar freakout. And it's definitely here. And that's something I think Fudge Tunnel does, is they have a lot of anti-solos. And this is a perfect case of, I think I talked about it in the first part of this Fudge Tunnel expedition, that tweaky sound. This song, Vamos, has a lot of tweakiness.
It's that polka beat that they do with the drums too.
Yeah, it's like it's off kilter and uncomfortable and a little bit like out of the normal range that you would do with music. It's like it's a little too high. It's like too pitched maybe. And I like it because it's like, to me it's challenging you a little. And yeah, and so like I think they draw from that, and that's kind of what Alex will sort of talk about is like there are elements of the Pixies that like can cherry pick and put into some of the structure of their stuff. For me, I think the most interesting song, and I'm not saying it's my favorite song, but I think the song that like they could have played around with this formula a little bit more is the song that we're going to end this set with, which is Don't Have Time for You. They are doing the quiet, loud stuff here. It's a little bit more diverse. It even reminds me like Failure a little bit.
Yeah, I like how it's like almost this ballady, like Brit pop thing.
Yeah.
Really like back to, Billy Chamberlain drums. But then at the end, the whole thing just fucking falls apart.
Yes.
Like sonically falls apart, and there's like almost like in an I Hate God way.
Yeah, that end freak out is it's a highlight for me. It's really interesting. So yeah, if you end up picking up Creep Diets or you want to explore this album a little bit more, just fair warning, like that first half is super strong. Like the first 6 songs, which is where Face Down and all the songs we played and are about to play kind of come from. But yeah, I don't know. It loses a little bit of steam in that second half. It's unfortunate because I think if they had edited this a little bit or just like done a little bit more, maybe that's what this album needed to be ready for Columbia. Maybe
or resequenced it or something. Yeah,
something. Yeah, it's unfortunate because like you think, okay, Carcass are going to do heart work. I guess Napalm kind of offers up a pretty radically.
They were doing their like Killing Joke
challenging record. Yeah. It's an interesting one for Napalm to release on Columbia, I guess, too, is Fear Emptiness. But at least that got
like Wolverine Blues is like, the last bit of death metal you got from Entomb.
Sure. Yeah. I think Wolverine Blues and Heartwork are the best examples of what you can do with like a mainstream death metal kind of record.
Mm-hmm. Well, this Covenant's the best, but yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't part of the Columbia deal, I guess. Yeah, I'm just
as far as mainstream is concerned.
Yes, yeah, that's it. That's peak. World Demise is getting there. It's not my favorite obituary record, but it's playing in that sandbox a little bit. Trying to cross over. But yeah, I think like it's just if you're gonna try and bust through, like Fear, Emptiness, and Despair and Creep Diets are probably not like. I don't know. To me, it's like they're not the offerings. Like I think Albert, is going to speak to it, but like had Complicated Futility of Ignorance come out as the Columbia record, I think like we're talking about a different history of Fudge Tunnel right now.
Yeah.
Because I honestly think that's the one I told you that grabbed me, and I was like, oh, this was like made for me. And again, I think I agree with you that it does probably run out of a little bit of steam in the second half. I think actually the majority of the songs we're playing are in the first half from that record too. Yeah. But to me, that's like a more kind of focused effort than maybe Creep Diets. They're still like developing, in Creep Diets. And
it feels, I think they were like kind of approaching new ground too.
Yeah.
That seemed much more like the stuff they're doing seemed much more like cutting edge.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Indeed. So, but let's get into it. We're going to hear from Albert from Decibel Magazine, editor-in-chief, for people that maybe don't know. He's a big Fudge Tunnel fan. If you did for some weird reason or just discovering Fudge Tunnel Part 2, definitely go back and listen to Fudge Tunnel Part 1. It's going to make a whole lot more sense in terms of what we're doing here. But if you go to the Decibel interview that Nick Green, who you'll hear from a little bit later, did, there's a T-shirt from it's Albert's own personal T-shirt of the original cover of Hate Songs. So I think Nick was hinting the fact that Albert might not have that T-shirt anymore.
Did he lose it or did it fall apart?
I don't know. Like there was a conversation I was having with Nick. I need a little bit more backstory in terms of the reference he was kind of making. So, but yeah, so we're going to hear from Albert. We're also going to hear from some of the members of the band as well throughout this episode a little, which is pretty cool. Yeah, sorry. I'm just looking here. Yeah, so David, you're going to hear from David a little bit, the drummer, throughout this episode a little bit more. And we're going to hear some insights about the Pixies from Alex. And then at the end of this set, he tells a pretty interesting story about Led Zeppelin. And I think it's kind of a cool story about like the aesthetic nature that he has in terms of how he makes music and thinks about music, in terms of like keeping in the mistakes and the organic nature and stuff like that. So I think that's some good context for that. So we've got Gray, Tipper Gore, 10%. Then we've got Vamos from Pixies, Surfer Rosa. And then our final tune that we'll hear from Creep Diets is Don't Have Time for You from Fudge Tunnel.
Hate Songs in E minor was released about a month before Nevermind was throughout the world. Obviously, the latter changed the shape of music to come for the next decade and well beyond that. So you would think there would be a fair amount of major label interest in what Fudge Tunnel were doing post Nevermind, and obviously post Hate Songs. But while Creep Diets, their second record, did wind up on a major label, Columbia Records in the United States, it was only because of Earache's ill-fated Columbia deal that occurred in 1993. In fact, Creep Diets was actually one of the very first records to be released through that licensing deal with Columbia. There were a total of 6, I think. It was Creep Diets, it was Entombed Wolverine Blues, it was Godflesh, Selfless, Carcass Heartwork, Napalm Death, Fear, Emptiness, Despair. And actually that is it, because the Cathedral records, I believe, were independent of the Earache Columbia deal. It's kind of crazy that it wasn't grunge that led Fudge Tunnel to a major label. It was fucking death metal, which something I'm sure they'd be really proud to realize, knowing what big fans those guys were of extreme metal. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So that in itself is kind of wild. But what's also strange is how Fudge Tunnel didn't really connect with a mainstream audience. Creep Diets had a lot going for it in terms of distribution in America, obviously, a marketing budget. Headbangers Ball, I recall vividly, got behind that record. There was a video for the lead track on the album Gray, which Headbangers Ball played more than once. I can't be certain of this, but I think the band was interviewed on Headbangers Ball once, because I have this vague memory of Alex Newport describing the video as very green to Ricky Rackman. I don't know if that was some early 90s fever dream I had or if that actually happened. But for whatever reason, it didn't really catch. Part of the problem may have been that to support the record, the band toured the States with Pain Teens and Season to Risk, who were 2 more bands that were kind of on the periphery of metal, alt-rock, hard alternative, stuff like that. Stuff that never really fit perfectly into any boxes, kind of the same way that Fudge Tunnel did. Fudge Tunnel returned in early 1994 to the States with Clutch, Fear Factory, and Sepultura. So they had then access to the metal crowd. So one would have thought that could have helped propel them a bit more into the consciousness. But by the time they were ready to release the follow-up to Creep Diets in late 1994, the Earache Columbia deal was already petering out. And that's really a shame, because The Complicated Futility of Ignorance is actually probably a record that would have been even easier for a major label to sell. Not that it was more commercial, it just kind of sounded better and tighter, had catchier, better songs really overall. Ultimately, for whatever reason, Fudge Tunnel did not connect with a mainstream audience when they had the opportunity. Maybe not that surprising in retrospect, but what can you do?
What you probably make a start. huge, I think, for all of us. We really love that sort of thing where you strip everything way back and then you suddenly get really loud. To be fair, we didn't really achieve that properly until we did the second album. On this song, Vamos has this awesome guitar freak out part in the middle that was, it's guitar, but it's not a solo. It's an anti-solo, and it's brilliant. And you can really hear that like pretty clearly at the end of Sunshine of Your Love. That's me trying to do the middle part of Vamos.
Estaba pensando sobre brillando con mi sister New Jersey. Ella me dijo que es una vida buena ya. Bien rica, bien chévere. Y me voy. Moñeta. We'll keep well bred, we'll stay well fed, we'll have all sons. They will be all well.
yes, the Columbia earache deal. We were kind of manoeuvred into going along with that. We really didn't want to, but we weren't given much choice. As I remember, we were talking to one of the Warner Brothers record labels ourselves, because we weren't signed to Earache in America, I don't think. Although the first one did come out through Relativity, I think, via Earache, but that wasn't a given, so I think there was a possibility for us to go our own way in America, which we kind of wanted to do, because by then we'd found out what a bunch of arseholes Earache could be. But it wasn't possible in the end, so Earache kind of had us over a barrel. But we also had Earache over a barrel because they couldn't sign their Columbia deal unless we were part of it. And I would imagine the other bands involved as well. There was like half a dozen of the sort of more popular Earache bands that were kind of deal breakers for Columbia, is how I remember it. I may have got this wrong. So we also had to sign for more albums in order for that to happen, you see, because Columbia insisted on all those bands being signed up for a certain amount of albums, and we really didn't want to sign for any more albums with Earache than we had to, but in the end we did. I think we just got them to pay us a load of money, which probably bought a guitar with or something like that. But yeah, added exposure. I guess having a major label behind you when you try and tour America is a very good thing. I doubt whether we'd have had the funds and backing to do it if we'd have just been on Earache, because we were never really popular enough. We didn't sell shed loads of records. We sold more than most people expected, probably, but so yeah, added exposure, added pressure. People, Columbia's a big organisation, and if they feel like putting their weight behind you, it can do you a lot of good. And in some areas it did, but it was a fairly short-term thing, because by the time we came to do the third album and hadn't already surpassed Nirvana's sales or whatever it was they were looking for, they kind of cooled off on the idea, and by the time the third album came out, there really wasn't a lot of support going on.
When I was growing up, I didn't have a whole lot of records, and they were quite expensive for a kid. I found out that my local library did a thing where you could rent records like you rent books. You could check it out just like a book. And they had physical graffiti. So you could take the vinyl home and play it for a few months and take it back. So for about 3 months, or however long it was before you had to take it back, that was all I listened to. The funny thing is, not technically a full Zeppelin album. It's bits taken from all different sessions from years apart, but somehow it all fits together and it works. And In My Time of Dying is incredible. It's just an opus, masterpiece. Their performance, and in particular Bonham's performance on this song, is just masterful. Absolutely masterful. Barely any fills, except for one massive one right in the kind of crucial climactic part of the song. But it's just basically this like ridiculously heavy backbeat that he plays. This weird sort of like double bass drum thing that he does with his heel. It's just absolutely fantastic, and everyone on this song is just vibing. It's just brilliant. At the end of the track, you can hear them because they know they've got it, and they're like, "That's the one. That's got to be the one." I just love that. When I was a kid, I would take the needle of the record and put it back and listen to just them talking in the studio, because I'd be like, "Wow, they're actually playing it. There's people in there actually playing this." A few years later, when CDs came out, they did a remaster for this. And I was like, oh, great, want to hear it on CD. Let's see how it compares. And what they done is, I got to, in my time of dying, and I was cranked it up. I was really enjoying it. And it got to the very end of the song, and I was sort of waiting for that moment when you can hear the studio chat, which was just something really special to me. I guess in mastering, somebody decided, or some A&R person decided, we don't need that. Let's just cut it off. And I was just horrified. I was like, that's the personality of the band, is like right there on this record. They left that in for a purpose, and you've fucking taken it off. Or you've cleaned it up. Well done. So back I go to the shop with my Physical Graffiti CD, and I say, I want a refund. And the guy goes, yeah, no problem. I hand it to him, and he just puts it on a stack of like 20 other Physical Graffitis that were returned that day. And he just looked at me and he's like, was it because they cut all that stuff off at the end of every song? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, that was really stupid.
That was Don't Have Time for You from Fudge Tunnel. Then we had Vamos from the Pixies, Surfer Rosa, 10% from Fudge Tunnel, Tipper Gore, and we kicked things off with what should have been their hit song, Gray, from Creep Diets. So, and then thank you, Albert, for that, and David for some of your contributions, talking about this era and putting some of that in perspective a bit. So, I think like what he says there about Led Zeppelin, the idea of like putting in the mistakes and the naturalness and organic nature of music, that may sound weird for a band that uses a lot of noise and distortion and stuff, but like in a way that is the organic nature of music. It's not polishing the music. It's kind of keeping some of those qualities to it a little. And I think that
sure. Yeah. I mean, even there's another interview I was listening to yesterday that was about going into a lot of his actual production career, and with like, because he's coming in, he's learning on 2-inch tape, but also this is like right in the cusp of Pro Tools and all this kind of shit. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about like one of the first bands he didn't name them, but he was like, the guy, the bass player was like, he was just a little bit behind everybody, and he took it into Pro Tools and like pushed him so he was actually like locked into the timeline and how it worked. He's like, it just sounded wrong.
Yeah. Like
there's a certain bit of this, like you can tell when it's too perfect. And then when it's too perfect, it like loses everything that was there. Mm-hmm. So he's like, then I put it back and it's like, okay, it's not technically perfect, but it sounds right.
I mean, sometimes to be a little bit behind is like the thing that adds to the music,
I mean, I always like, even those, we always go back to those early Catatonia records too, where, Jonas is not playing in time at all. Everybody's kind of like wishy-washy as far as, the click track is concerned. There is no click track. I think there's a really fine line between doing something like that and then being like so clicky that it sounds manufactured. Mm-hmm. Like it depends on what you're trying to do as well. But I think if there's a little bit of that variety to it, that's what makes it interesting. I don't want it to be perfect. Anything that's perfect is kind of boring.
Yeah, I guess there's an art form to perfection, like when you talk about like Pet Sounds or Phil Spector, or something like that. That's like a different, like try and craft the perfect pop song. Like there's something kind of cool about that. But that's
still not perfect. It's still a manufactured thing. Even like My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah,
like sure. That's manufactured, but it doesn't sound artificial.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Is when it doesn't sound like a computer or. It still sounds like a hand, like a human being's hand has touched this in some capacity.
Well, I think like, I'm teaching Bob Dylan this week, and one of the more interesting things about like a Rolling Stone, widely considered the, kind of the most essential kind of like rock song in terms of the impact it sort of had. But like famously, the organ line in that song from Al Cooper, like he wasn't an organ player. He actually came in to play guitar, and Mike Bloomfield from the Butterfield Blues Band, Jesus, band that Mike's really turned me on. I know, was there, and he heard that guy like rip, and he was the best like white guitar player in America, hands down, mm-hmm. And he was like, fuck, I can't play guitar. And so like, he's just like fucking around with the organ, doesn't know how to play it. And he just like sits there for the jam session. And because he doesn't know how to play the organ, he's always like a half step behind the rest of the song because he's waiting to hear what everybody else is like doing, and then just like following them behind. But that's like that lazy organ gives like a Rolling Stone, it's like kind of organic quality. And then he said what was starting to happen is he would get called in as a session guy and they would want him to play wrong. And he said then he heard other people imitating him playing wrong on the record, and he was just like, it was blowing my mind. Like, don't they know I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and that was the point of it? But again, that's the difference between organic and then trying to manufacture organic, you know. And when you try and manufacture organic in a false way, it comes off false. You know, it's either it is or it isn't. You know,
I think you can completely tell if something's like disingenuous. At least I at this point, I can tell when stuff's disingenuous.
Yeah.
Like even like the first Star Wars movie where they didn't have enough frames to make the Tusken Raider look like he was, raising the thing above his head and, shaking it. Yeah. They rolled it back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it feels right.
Yeah.
Like those types of things don't happen anymore.
No. Yeah.
Everything's too like, I feel like the whole like Marvel movie thing is, I've been seeing Doctor Strange. I kind of don't care at this point, but it feels like they like, okay, here's the action scenes that need to happen. Try to write a story around that. We already have the visual effects finished.
Yeah.
Now go for it. Like, it's just, when it's that contrived, it doesn't, I don't know, it's missing something for me.
Yeah, I definitely can see that for sure. And I've kind of separated those things as their own, like, kind of thing. Like, I don't know, like I almost don't like, when they rise above like my expectations, I get excited, with like Thor Ragnarok or Winter Soldier or something like that.
Well, that last Spider-Man movie I thought was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
it was fun. It felt heart. Like it had heart. It was about the characters. It wasn't about the plot. And plot ultimately doesn't mean shit.
It's funny because the podcast that I'm going to be doing this summer, the comic one that I think I talked about maybe in the Chasm or Edge of Sanity episode, but it's on the comic Excalibur, which is a spinoff of X-Men. And one of the guys that's a college professor on there, he kind of talks about how the thing he likes the most about comic book movies, or not comic movies, but comic book superhero teams is the opposite of battles. He says he talks about like one of his, favorite episodes of like television. I'm trying to remember what series he talks about, but it's where the characters all sit around a dinner table and just like talk about something like inane the whole time. And he says, that's what like I want from Excalibur. I don't want fucking fights. I don't care about the fights.
No, it's about like people not getting along, or like, it's about the characters. It's never about the plot.
Yeah. Like you and I did not get into Buffy the Vampire Slayer for like the fight scenes. Like there's a fight scene on occasion that like rises above like TV fight scenes, but it's all about like the interactions of characters. Like that's why I care about it,
Well, and like that's why like a lot of the stuff in the newer Star Wars movies don't land, because
it's just action.
It's not an emotional fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, exactly. I don't care how like crazy the choreography is. Like, if it doesn't mean anything,
it's just empty calories.
What's the fucking point? Yeah. Like, I'd rather see people like two old guys like wrestling over a broom if it had like emotional, weight to it. But sure. I don't care if you're like,
Are you making a Woman in Love reference there, Mark? Naked wrestling with Oliver Reed.
It's a pretty good scene, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. So if you like penises and you like wrestling, it's
that's how the Northman was supposed to end, but they couldn't get wide release if there was dollars flopping around.
Yeah,
we've got Eastern Promises and we've got
Well, and think about like if they could actually have made 300 like the way it was actually in history. The Spartans all slept naked together before battle, and camaraderie and stuff. But no, it's like I think of like, why do I love the Uncanny X-Men so much? It's because like the scenes I remember from Claremont were the scenes where they're fucking playing like baseball.
Yeah, and that's the same like Star Trek too. Like, you're figuring out how these characters interact together. It's not about how like complicated the plot is, because ultimately it doesn't matter. It's about, we care about these characters. Yep.
And I think that's missing from a lot of art in a lot of ways. I think you're right.
Especially modern stuff where they're more concerned about like, how does this fit into the next thing? But if it's a bunch of things that don't mean anything that fit together, who cares?
Yep. Yeah, and there's definitely a way to do that and still make you care, but it's like it's a tightrope. There's a lot of series
they already
that
did it.
pull
And I
that
don't
off.
think they can do it again.
What's that?
Well, like the two Avengers movies, the
Oh yeah, in the Marvel sort of sense. Yeah.
and really
Yeah.
like you didn't need to see all the other stuff to make it make any difference. But like I want to just see like some good, like just a single story like that. I really miss that. I don't want everything to be a fucking universe.
Yeah, and I am almost like drawn more to elements. I'm not saying all of it works, but I think like the impulse of like what like Hawkeye was gonna maybe be, which is like just like a character piece with like him and the girl, you know. And there's like some tie-ins and things like that, but like I found that like their interactions where they're just being like humans to each other and trying to like fix each other a little bit, like that's where I cared, you know.
Exactly. That's what people are missing on all this shit. Like, it doesn't matter who Spider-Man fights. We love Spider-Man because he's this underdog that's trying to do the right thing, and he's over his head.
I didn't give two shits about any of the fights in that last Spider-Man, but what I cared about was the interactions with Doc Ock and the interactions with Defoe and the interactions between the three Spider-Mans. And then
that was the best.
That's it. That's what you want. Like you want characters, and characters matter and stuff. So I don't know. It's a little sidebar or like art critique, but it's definitely something like I'm gonna kind of try and bring into my pop culture class that I'm gonna be teaching next year, is like how to like evaluate art on like just different levels, and what does it mean, the difference between entertainment and art, on some level,
Yeah.
like,
But even Terminator 2, like, okay, whatever about the plot, but we care about the characters.
Sure.
We care about John Connor. We even care about the Terminator who was bad, now came back and he's helping. And then we cry when he, goes down into the lava with his fucking thumb up. Like, it's
baby.
about characters. It's not about the plot.
Yep, absolutely.
I wish
they
people
made you
would get
care
back
about
to
like a synthetic robot guy, he's almost become human. It's like Iron Giant type shit,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Superman. Or even that last, I still haven't seen that Nick Cage movie that you were talking about. The
Pig.
Pig, but I've heard it's wonderful. And I think that's probably character based.
Yeah, it is super character based. And where you think it's going to maybe become a John Wick movie, it like totally like zags when it like other movies would zip. And I think that's fucking cool.
Good.
It's kind of subverts you.
What did you see that on? What service was it on? Do you remember?
Maybe Hulu or Prime. I can't remember. I have too many fucking streaming things right now.
Yeah, I'd like to see that though.
Yeah, it's really good. But so back to Fudge Tunnel. Kerrang described their third album, The Complicated Futility of Ignorance, as, quote, the soundtrack you would use to disguise the dull thumps and gurgling noises as you hacked your next door neighbor to death. It's fucking interesting. Alex,
I agree with it, but it's evocative.
It's evocative, yeah. And Alex responded to that. He goes, I don't know anything about it. Smiling. He says, I'm totally happy and relaxed. Nothing ever gets me down. He's kind of winking. He says, but there's more to it than that. There's not many things that I personally hate. That's a pretty strong word. He says the album has a couple of extra anti-music business songs, but the rest is just the general stupidity of the human race. So, it's funny that all these bands that did the Columbia deal, almost a lot of them, their next record was like, they had a lot of songs targeting like the music industry. I mean, just think of Swan Song. It's pretty fascinating, So Earache and Columbia really left a lot of people with a lot of fucking bitterness towards the music industry. I find that to be endlessly fascinating,
It was just like the potential there is what really makes it so disappointing.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. So
like what it really could have done, but I was just looking back at the Don't Believe a Word, Keep on Rotting, Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody. Yeah, I mean it's all kind of well,
sad. And even like the stuff that was on even the unreleased Swan Song stuff. Like I Told You So, Corporate Rock really, sucked.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, that was on Wake Up and Smell the Carcass.
Wake Up and Smell. Yep. And they, in this ear pollution interview from '99, I found that it's kind of based on this other quote from Kerrang, and I'll read this to you first, and then I'll share the ear pollution thought with Alex. And this is from, I think, either Adrian or David. I forgot to write down. It's from the same Kerrang interview. It says, the only thing that pisses the trio off is the fact that since Alex teamed up with Sepultura's Max Cavalera for the Nail Bomb project, he is singled out as the star of the band when they consider themselves equals.
Yeah.
And I think, that's where things kind of start to sort of, dissipate within the dynamics of the power trio a little bit. And,
I think there's a lot of reasons why that wasn't he was like living with Max and like dating some relative of his or something.
Sister. Yeah. Or sister-in-law of Max's, I think.
So there's like a lot of different things that, kind of
might have been Gloria's sister. I think it might have been Gloria's sister. I think that's what it might have been.
Something like that. But like, I don't think it was intentional. I think the record companies are the ones, at least the stuff I've been, the interviews I've been reading with Alex, he was like, this was just kind of us. It was just a lark. We were just having fun. And then the record companies had to turn it into something more than it was for record company reasons. Cause they got to make money and they got to do tours and blah, blah, blah. And
yep. Yeah, no, and this is obviously released after Nail Bomb puts out Point Blank in the later part of '94. I think comes out September, October of '94. Futility does. Yeah. And the band had obviously been quote unquote liberated from Columbia. Mm-hmm. And here's a quote from Adrian. He says, 2 quotes, grins Adrian. The songs just don't do it for us. And it's not exactly chock full of hits, is it? Those are 2 quotes from Columbia. It's this idea that like they wanted Fudge Tunnel to be something they weren't, and Adrian goes on, he says, we basically told Columbia, if you don't fucking like it, don't put it out. We're not going to change. I think they expected us to run away and write a load more songs. We were hoping they'd drop us anyways, because we were getting fed up with the way we were being treated on tour and the way they wanted to market us, sneers Alex. They want us to be the next Nirvana. And I think that just kind of wore on them pretty thin. But in the ear pollution interview, I don't know who the interviewer is. I forgot to write that down. He says, how did working with Max on Nail Bomb, Max Cavalera, for people that don't know, Nail Bomb from Sepultura, and the sound and style that the two of you produce affect the writing and recording of the complicated Futility of Ignorance? And Alex says it's inevitable that some of that would rub off with Fudge Tunnel. I think it's basically made us want to play a little tighter. In another way, though, we learned about being spontaneous, keeping mistakes and such. He says, I really like the way that a lot of the guitars sounded on Nail Bomb's Point Blank, and I used some of that same technique for Fudge Tunnel. And I saw somewhere else where people kind of asked, like, Futility seems heavier. Is that because of like being around and touring with Sepultura and being part of Nail Bomb? And he says, yeah, that definitely rubbed off on us in a lot of ways. The Sepultura kind of KSAD.
Well, fuck yeah. I mean, Random Acts sounds like a Sepultura song.
For sure. Yeah.
Like completely. That riff.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I know. I wrote, it's hard not to notice some of the Nail Bomb Sepultura focus heaviness hasn't worn off when I wrote about Random Acts. So, yeah. And so that's kind of where we're left, in terms of getting into this record. And I have a lot of fondness for this record. I mean, Albert mentioned earlier in the episode that he thinks it's a stronger record than Creep Diets. And in a lot of ways, I kind of agree with that. It's a better sounding record.
It might well be, but I don't find it any more enjoyable.
Yeah, and maybe it's because did you even check this record out when it came out?
Yeah, I got serviced this record.
Did you? Okay, I didn't know if you were still kind of into.
But I was just like it was just like it was too. It was too tight and too like refined for my taste at that time. I liked the more kind of like emotive, sloppier.
I get it.
Vibe.
I get it. Yeah. And I think for like where my aesthetics were in '94, it hit like exactly what the kind of stuff I was getting into, whether it be.
It's not a bad record. It's just
far beyond
my least favorite
era. Yeah. So,
it totally fit that mold for sure.
Yeah. It's just, that's where my brain was, Astro Creep, White Zombie type shit, like just sonic. It had just, it had a lot of sonic kind of qualities to it. And that's what I was kind of craving. I think now I definitely, prefer Hate Songs because I am much more into art aesthetic and all the bands that were sort of influencing them. But Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. So I've kind of gone backwards. I started with their newest one and then kind of went backwards, whereas you were kind of moving the opposite direction, which is kind of funny. So
Well, even that, like, Joy of Irony has almost like proto nu metal vibes.
Yeah, the opening riff, and I don't know if you would have grabbed this, but this is something that is in my DNA. It's fucking Albatross from Corrosion of Conformity. It's that
okay
riff.
It sounded so familiar. I was just like, what the fuck
That's
is
it.
this?
Yeah, if you turn on Albatross, you'd be like, oh fuck, it's the same guitar tone that Pepper Keenan kind of got, on Down and stuff like that.
This and Joy of Irony, that's the one that there's almost a lead. I put in quotes, but it's more of a lead than anything they ever did before.
Yep. It's also the one, here's another band that like was a huge touchstone for me and my group. And I know that really did nothing for you and Chris. I know, like, I think you kind of started to appreciate their stuff like later, like a decade later, but like Machine Head, they're in that sandbox with that first Machine Head record, and songs like Davidian and stuff like that. But
Blackening is the only Machine Head record I think I really give a shit about.
Yeah, and that's their best one for sure. Even the ones after that were pretty good. That Decibel sort of covered, and even Albert kind of admitted, like,
but like Burn My Eyes is just like, this is not.
It wasn't for you guys. That was a record fucking made for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? My generation. That was like, we wanted more. Can you make Vulgar Display of Power be more? Yes, here it is. Okay, can you make KSAD more? Yes. So like, I get it. It's totally an age thing. And, if people don't like dig Burn My Eyes, like, I'm just like, I shrug my shoulders. I'm like, that's fine. It doesn't, I get it. It's like a time and a place kind of record,
Totally. Absolutely.
But it's funny. I wrote like lots of groove in this song. I said, it's starting to grow. We're talking about Joy of Irony, the second song we're going to play here. It's definitely growing out of Pantera, White Zombie, and Machine Head kind of popularity. I think what did I write? I said, I think they're kind of unrelated. And obviously, Fudge Tunnel is way more tied to like post-punk and hardcore. But my brain was like connecting those two elements. So I don't think, Fudge Tunnel gave a shit what White Zombie and Machine Head were doing.
No, I don't think so either.
It just seems like the Venn diagrams are like pushing in at this moment, and they just, maybe it's hanging out with Max, like some of that's rubbing off or what. But
I think Sepultura definitely had something to do with that. I mean, with Roots and everything, like Roots and Vulgar Display are probably two of the bigger records that kind of pushed everything.
Well, you mean KSAD more? I would say Chaos.
You think Chaos?
Well, because Roots doesn't come out till 96, and I think by then, like Korn had already made their presence. I think what Roots did is it codified the Korn sound, but like made it heavier, which I think in a lot of ways, what Roots
the first Korn was, that's 96.
No, Korn's 94. So Korn's the same time as this. So I'm getting into the first Korn at the same time that Far Beyond Driven's coming out, the same time Machine Head's coming out. That's all like, for me, freshman, sophomore year.
And
so
KSAD
it's weird.
Is 94, right?
KSAD is 93.
93.
KSAD happens before Nail Bomb. So we went right from KSAD to Nail Bomb. And then like for us, Fudge Tunnel was the band with the other guy from Nail Bomb. That was like how we saw it. Like it was like, we knew Max, we knew Sepultura, and it's like, oh, who's this other guy in Nail Bomb? Oh, he's in this band called Fudge Tunnel. They're on Earache. Oh, now I'm interested. And then I kind of went back and started to like become interested. But I think like people assume that Korn came out way later because nu metal doesn't really like blow up for like a few more years. But like,
I knew nothing about Korn except when I learned that Todd McFarlane did one of their album covers.
And that was their third record by then, so that was 98.
They were I wasn't watching any of that shit.
No, and I don't blame you. You shouldn't have been. Like, if I was where you were, I would have been fucking listening to Finnish death metal too, as you should have been. But I think what's interesting is I think what Roots really did in 96, if I'm gonna kind of, they paved the way for Slipknot. Because in a lot of ways, what Roots was, is it was it wasn't like one of these like young fucking punk ass bitch bands that like Korn and some of those people were kind of associated with. Roots was an established thrash metal band with like street cred that kind of brought in Ross Robinson, did that.
Yeah.
And was heavier. It was heavier than almost anything else that was coming out of any of the new metal stuff. And so it's like, oh, you can actually do something a little bit more extreme with new metal. You can also become fruitier, like Limp Bizkit or fucking Crazy Town, Be My Butterfly. You can go that direction, or you can like get heavier. And in a sense, that set up like Slipknot, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Slipknot has a huge role in the history of metal, and it's a role that I'm not particularly drawn to, but I definitely appreciate them because they're the next gateway. They're the next Vulgar Display, but just like 9 years later or 8 years later. I just wasn't that gateway anymore, you know?
It is kind of interesting how, like, because I think Sepultura was the last, like, Arise, I think, is the last great thrash record in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really go that much further in our thrash series than, say, 91, you know?
I think that's, as far as, like, tone is concerned and, like, what I consider, you know, which isn't what everybody considers, but what I consider thrash is that palm muted, you know, chuggy stuff. Like, Arise was about as good as it got. Then they jumped up to this night, like they kept progressing. Yeah. And I thought, you know, Chaos AD was like mostly good from my perspective. Roots, I did not give a shit about, but in retrospect, I can see the value of it.
Yeah.
I like that they were doing like exactly what they wanted to do. They brought like their own cultural stuff into it as well. And they were still like pushing the art form a little bit, which, you know,
I think if you listen to that record, not as a Sepultura record, it's sort of like if you could listen to like Far Beyond Driven in some ways and not think about like the douchebaggery of Pantera fans. Yeah. I think there are some really experimental elements there that I got to give a band that was at their like commercial zenith some credit for fucking trying.
Absolutely.
You know, like,
oh, totally. I'll give them credit.
They bring like Mike Patton on for a tune that's like really abstract. They do fucking a Crust song called Dictator Shit. That's really interesting. Like there's shit that doesn't work. You know, there's stuff that doesn't hold up very well. But like I appreciated Roots like at the time. Like I was not as passionate about Sepultura at that point. But I don't know. Yeah, those would be like interesting records to do like an episode on, like picking out like 3 or 4 of those like transitional records from bands that like you and I kind of grew up with and dug, but then like, what the fuck is this? Like, you know what I mean? It'd be like interesting discussion points or something, you know?
Sure. Absolutely.
But yeah, I think in retrospect, I don't think I knew at the time what Roots meant, but I think when you look at the trajectory of like the history of metal and for the attention
it's up there, man. It's really
that Slipknot got.
Yeah.
Slipknot doesn't really, to me, exist unless I think Sepultura paves that way. Because I think in a way, like they convince Roadrunner that you can like do that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong connection. And I know that there are listeners who are more connected to like Slipknot, even some patrons. And that's cool because they probably weren't as like jaded as I was at that point.
But that's their entry point, you know. That's totally cool. Like if Slipknot's your entry point, that was the most extreme mainstream thing that was there. Like when we were, you know, listening to whatever mainstream shit we were listening to at the time. But
I think too, like there's even some people that are my age that were into the same as some of the stuff that I was into that also got into Slipknot. Like Brian kind of dug Slipknot a little, and
I didn't like the clown bullshit.
Yeah, the mask
theatricality was stupid to me.
It doesn't. Yeah, it was the fans and the fashion that was hard for me to get past, I think. But
it made me feel like it was God, I can't think what the stupid things are called. The Fago loving.
Oh, ICP-ish. Yeah.
It was like the ICP kind of thing. Like, I get it. Like people, it's cool to be part of a tribe or a group or whatever, but I just didn't give a shit. And it seems stupid for grown people to be into stuff that was that juvenile.
Yeah.
Like when I was 14, that would have been fucking awesome.
Yeah. There's definitely some angsty sort of ness in the Ozfest 98 kind of scene that was, I think, I don't know. Like there's people my age that like I respect, like I said, that got into it. And I think what they didn't get as into is they were maybe not as deep into like the Europe stuff. Yeah. I think like I put the like my angsty energy instead of into like Korn and like the next iteration of new metal kind of anger. I put it into like sad like Catatonia, Anathema.
See, that stuff still seems more, I don't know.
Because it was more grown up. It was like a more grown up way of processing those sort of like
Jonathan Davis, like still now is like a 50-something-year-old man.
I know, you talk about it. I know.
It seems so dumb to me. Like,
but I guess that's him processing that at the time, you know.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't want to relive anything I did when I was 14 in that like kind of emotional way, because I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about.
I guess like for people like you and I though, and maybe I'm drawing you into this too much, and so, you know, feel free to beg to disagree. You and I never really went to too many metal shows after probably the age of like 16 with the intent of like hurting people or getting into like pits.
I never went to a show for that.
Because we're not people that are naturally aggressive in that sort of way, right? I'm naturally aggressive in a competitive way. Like you put me into sports and I'll fucking go ballistic, but I wasn't raised with brothers. And I wasn't raised in that like punching your friends thing. Like that's not
wrestling
like
your friends.
Yeah, it's not like a thing. Yeah, especially wrestling naked with Oliver Reed. It's not like a thing that I've ever thought about doing.
I mean, if Oliver Reed was my friend, I'd probably.
That's true. Yeah, if he's getting naked, you might as well just fucking drop trow and just fucking have at it. But I think like that's not our personalities, and I think nu metal is made for people whose personalities are to work out their shit in a more aggressive, masculine sort of way. And
sure.
And that might be an oversimplification of it. And I'm probably missing some elements. I mean, you know, some of the guys in Slipknot like are pretty good musicians. So like, yeah, they're that part's real, you know, I get it. But
what is it? Jordy, the drummer that passed away.
Yeah. Joey Jordison. Yeah.
He was a great drummer.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yep.
But like, as far as like when people are talking about, I'm a clown and this is my outer skin and blah, like, dude, come on. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is really what you feel? But I know people that actually feel that way.
Yeah. There's like,
it just doesn't seem, you know. I
mean, think of like cosplay. Like cosplay has like an element of it that's like fun. It can be like, I like Halloween.
Sure.
But like, there's people that take cosplay like too far. And I just think that it's like black metal people. Like there's people that like take it all so seriously and it's, I don't know. And there are things I'm very serious and passionate about. Like I'm very serious and passionate about respecting like great art for being art. But at the same time, it can also like, I like subversive stuff that can be humorous and meta at the same time. Like it doesn't all have to be like serious and stuffy all the time, you know?
Yeah, no. I think that everything's got its, you know, its levels of intensity or whatever, but like nothing is so sacrosanct that you can't make fun of it. To me.
Yeah. Yep. No, I agree. And I just think like we were working out some of our angstiness, like I said, because we gravitated more towards the bands in Europe that were kind of growing up and processing their anger and angstiness in those kind of ways, like the Paradise Lost, Catatonia, Anathema, Brides, you know, Nick
it's more
Drake.
Abstract. Yeah.
We were starting to go into that road.
Pantera's,
Buckley.
Which I think, you know, Pantera was an important part of my like evolution, but I don't ever go back and listen to them. Yeah.
And if I hear, not the hits, but like some of the deep cuts on Far Beyond and Vulgar, like and even like the one after might be better than both those records. That's a crazy thing about that. Like
which one?
The one that's got the snake on the cover, Great Southern Trendkill. That might be honestly.
I don't know if I ever even heard it. I just kind of gave up on them.
Honestly, if we sat down just not to do a show, but like I bet you'd be like surprised how fucking weird that record is. Like that was, I think he's in like the full pits of heroin at that point, and it's like it's pretty
full, like off the rails.
He's off the rails, and Dimebag is doing, I think, his most creative like guitar playing. Like he's free of any expectation. Like he's doing like it's weird. There's like,
was that their like highest charting record too?
Far Beyond Driven, I think was. Far Beyond Driven debuted at number 1.
It's number 1, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the heaviest number 1 record I think ever.
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that and like Black Album, right?
Yeah. Did Slipknot ever debut at number one? Like at their peak? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know either. So nowadays I don't know because the Billboard charts almost are meaningless. So like,
Yeah, I mean, as far as like how many they're selling, compared
there's
to
like
back
extreme
then.
metal bands that like Cannibal Corpse like charts like top 12 just because
Yeah.
people buy metal records and
'Cause
nobody buys
they're
like
selling
other records.
100,000.
Yeah, yeah, or something like that. You know, it's pretty wild. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, so you go from songs like, you know, Random Acts of Cruelty and then Joy of Irony. And then like, to me, 6/8 is a pretty interesting tune. And I think 6/8 is the kind of song that for me maybe puts Futility a little bit over the edge of Creep Diets because they're actually playing in like a real heavy doom sort of sense. I mean, it's like
I put it's like half Sabbath speed.
yeah.
Melvin's Dirge. Kind of
Melvin's,
stuff.
that's it. Yep. And then you get a side quest. the back half of the song, like all of a sudden just goes in like a weird side quest. And Black Sabbath used to go on a side quest on like Volume
All the time.
4.
Yeah.
And I love that shit, you know? And so like, I don't know. I mean, they're huge Sabbath fans, you know, clearly we heard that in part 1 when Alex was talking about like, that was the only record he had, you know, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's super earned. It's like those molasses riffs they're pretty badass too. I forgot something about Joy of Irony because we got on like our little tangent there with Slipknot and all these other sort of things. The very end of Joy of Irony is a nice little ode to Mick Mars' fucking vocoder solo from Kickstart My Heart.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. Also, I got a real deep cut.
Okay.
If anybody's ever watched the Thundercats cartoon, they use that same effect on the Robert Burbles. Do you ever remember those guys?
I do.
They were
I
like
knew
half
their
cybernetic, like teddy bears. And Robert Bear, was it Robert Bear or Robert Bob? One of the guys, he talked that same way.
Did they kind of talk like the effect from Transformers the movie, like the junk bots? A little like that kind of effect.
That mixed with Mix Mars.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It was just like a vocoder.
Cool. Hey, it's what you fucking came to Fudge Tunnel for was Transformers the movie and Thundercats references.
Thundercats and, you know,
Mick Mars
and Mick Mars stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You know,
toughest neck in the business.
Yes, fucking guy. And then we're gonna end this set with "Find Your Fortune," and this is just like it's like Motorhead meets Sabbath meets Black Flag meets the Swans. It's just got like
it's kind of the whole thing. I put, what the hell does it say?
It's got some I Hate God tendencies too. That's pretty crushing.
Man, my writing is really bad. Gnarly intro bit. I don't know what the fuck that means.
Yeah,
but then
gnarly.
I put maybe it goes into Sludge Town.
Yep.
Almost Neurosis.
Sledge Down.
Heavy, Quiet Loud, and then My War Side too.
And I bet you, there's the Black Flag Sabbathy kind of stuff. And you know, when you're hearing Neurosis, what I'm kind of hearing is like Swans. And
it's the build, is what
the same kind of thing. Yeah,
absolutely,
same kind of thing. So, and then we'll hear from Nick, kind of talking a lot about this kind of era, and So let's get into it as we start to kind of move here. We're actually going to hear from Alex at the beginning talking about Nirvana a bit. And I think like, you know, when you get into like records like this, I felt that was kind of a cool little add-on for people that maybe wouldn't associate Fudge Tunnel with like a band like Nirvana. So we're going to go from there to Random Acts of Cruelty, Joy of Irony, 6/8, and Find Your Fortune.
So many of
and then we'll hear from Nick Green.
songs and records that influenced hate songs were from the previous decade or the 70s or 80s. But actually one that was current at that time was Nirvana. And, you know, we heard the early 7 inches that they did with Sub Pop, and then Bleach came out. And, you know, it was definitely a huge influence. It was strange at the time because, you know, everybody knew the Nirvana records were great, and, you know, a lot of people were talking about them. And they came over to England and they played first with Tad and then also with Sonic Youth, I think. And we saw them on those shows, and to be frank, they were terrible. Like, Tad blew them away completely. And Nirvana knew it and apologized to the audience, and, you know, next time, when we come back next time, we'll be much better. We'll get our shit together. And so I always loved Nirvana, but sort of wrote them off after that, you know. And then Nevermind came out, they came back over to tour, got their shit together, completely different story. Bleach, I definitely wore this record out. It's just great pop songs covered with this like depressed, edgy, dirty sound around it. It's just brilliant.
There was a lot of bitterness in general in our relationship with our various record companies. I don't know, we weren't really around so much for the dissolution of the Columbia deal, because we were kind of in the process of finishing the band when that was starting to come apart. So we'd already made the decision that we were going to stop as a band, partly because of the grief of having to work with earache, and all the pressure that put on everybody, and partly just also because we kind of felt like we'd come to the natural end of things, and we were, we felt like we'd sort of said all we wanted to say musically, and we didn't want to start just repeating ourselves. We didn't want a career. We just wanted to make some music and then fuck off. Yeah, the nail bomb thing. It's a long time ago and it's difficult to remember, but I don't really remember it having any adverse effect on relations between the three of us. It maybe used to get a little bit tiresome if someone wanted to interview you and then it turned into a nail bomb interview, but I don't really remember that happening particularly. They might ask a couple of questions that related to nail bomb or Sepultura or whatever, but I think we were all a bit more grown up than that, to be honest. So yeah, I guess that's probably legend rather than truth. At least I hope it is. I can't remember.
My world is great, practice random. I
So that last album, The Complicated Futility of Ignorance, great title, easy to say. I think I like that one the best out of all our records, but that tends to be the way, is you always like the most recent one most. I guess Hate Songs is always going to be the one that people will think of when they think of Fudge Tunnel. But that last album, I don't know, I think it just sounded, we kind of got the sound right on that one. The songs, it was getting a little bit tricky writing songs at that point. Going back to what I said earlier about we kind of felt like we said what we wanted to say. We did feel a bit like we were starting to repeat ourselves. And so we were kind of going to great lengths not to, and to some extent that's always going to affect the songs, maybe, to their detriment. So we tried to write experimental things like, let's see how few notes we can make a song out of. So Back Down, which is one of my favourites, was intended to be a song comprised entirely of 2 notes, but in the end we had to put some more notes in it because it sounded shit otherwise. But we did get a song out of that idea anyway. So yeah, I guess Back Down's one of my favourites.
Hello to all of the listeners in the whole Requiem kingdom. This is Nick Green from Decibel Magazine, and Jason and Mark have asked me here today to discuss the third and, let's just say for now, final Fudge Tunnel release, The Complicated Futility of Ignorance. This is a kind of a tough one for me because I'm getting older now, and I find myself constantly mixing up the title of this album with The Natural Beauty of Infidelity, and then I have to go down the whole typo negative rabbit hole for an hour or two. Now, as the autocorrect function on my phone would say, I know you're ducking someone else. Anyway, back to Fudge Tunnel. This album, again, is also a little difficult to dissect because, I have to be honest here, it's not my favorite. I think there are probably some Fudge Tunnel fans that love this album most of all because it's the quote-unquote heaviest Fudge Tunnel album. There are portions of it that sound like a completely different band wrote and recorded it, though. So I would challenge everyone to listen to a track like Back Down and to try to not think of that as a Pantera song. In my mind, the first 2 Fudge Tunnel albums have this real clarity of vision and purpose, but this album mostly sounds like a relic of that weird phase in the middle of the 1990s where everyone was off doing that unpalatable groove metal thing. I do, however, really like the song 6-8, which is in the middle of the album, and it's, I think, one of the longer tracks that the band ever recorded. It's set at this kind of doom metal tempo, but it's also arty and angular and sounds like a post-hardcore band, which I think is, all in all, more authentic to what the guys in Fudge Tunnel actually viewed as their influences. And you can definitely hear the reverberations of a song like that in Alex Newport's post-Fudge Tunnel band Theory of Ruin, not to mention his work as a producer. As for Fudge Tunnel's influence, again, that is a really hard question to answer. I personally hear reverberations in the music of At the Drive-In, which was a band that Alex Newport worked with early on, and I hear it Fudge Tunnel strongly on the album The Ruin of Nova Roma by the Welsh band Taint. I can also hear it in Cave-In, particularly on the records Jupiter and Antenna and everything that followed from that. But the legacy of admittedly kind of niche band like Fudge Tunnel is something I've always been curious about. So when I had the opportunity to interview Alex Newport a couple of years ago, I asked him if he'd ever been told Fudge Tunnel was an influence. And I think his response, which I'm about to read to you, speaks volumes. He said, I hear that a lot. People will send me stuff that they claim was influenced by Fudge Tunnel. And there's a huge part of me that's very proud to have influenced anybody with that music. That's fantastic. Most of the time, though, when I listen to stuff that people send me that they say was influenced by Fudge Tunnel, I'll hear it and think, okay, well, you've completely missed the point. A lot of the stuff people send me is doomy or sludgy kind of stuff with lyrics pulled straight out of Dungeons and Dragons. They'll capture the heaviness of Fudge Tunnel, but completely miss out on the ironic humor or the noisy, industrial, arty elements that we were trying to incorporate. It's interesting to me that you could listen to Fudge Tunnel and just come out sounding like a sludge band. That's really not what we were about at all. A problem for me is that I don't really listen to that kind of music, and I didn't really even when I was in Fudge Tunnel. Why did Fudge Tunnel come out sounding the way it did? I have no idea.
That was Find Your Fortune, 6/8, The Joy of Irony, and Random Acts of Cruelty from the final Fudge Tunnel release, The Complicated Futility of Ignorance from 1994. We also heard from Nick in that set as well, and from David. So thank you once again. Before we kind of get to the letters and things like that to kind of wrap everything up, I did have this from that ear pollution issue from 1999, excuse me. And the interview asks Alex why Fudge Tunnel split. And he says, with Fudge Tunnel, we decided from a very early point that we should split up. And as soon as we got to the stage where we were repeating ourselves or wearing out the jokes, so to speak. Originally, we had intended to do only one LP, but we enjoyed playing together and did some more. Eventually, the point came where we couldn't justify any new material. I think we pretty much exhausted the one riff we had. So, pretty funny. And then the interviewer asks, he says, are you still in touch with Adrian and Dave? He says, yeah, I speak to them fairly often. Dave recently became a father. This is back in 99. So he's busy changing nappies and stuff, I'm sure. Adrian is always talking about visiting San Francisco, but he hasn't made it over here yet. So, yeah.
Now that kid's probably in college.
Yeah, no shit. And then the final kind of Fudge Tunnel question is, do you still have people pestering you about the lyrics to Fudge Tunnel? And he says, all the fucking time. He says, I actually added a lyric disclaimer to the FAQ section of my website. I think people take the lyrics way too seriously. A lot of the lyrics were observations or stories about some particularly fucked up person or persons, and I would write the lyrics in a narrative style or from the point of view of the person involved, which led to a lot of problems as people assume I was writing about my own life. Do you really beat your girlfriend with a belt? Did you really kill your own baby? Give me a fucking break. Funny. So as we're going to kind of close things out today with two tunes, and then we'll say we'll read some letters and some other sort of feedback and stuff. But the last two tunes that we're going to kind of close things out is aforementioned. This is a throwback to part 1 in Hate Songs in E minor. And I thought like the proper way to kind of close out Fudge Tunnel is the way they really wanted their debut album to sort of be closed out with, which is the Sunshine of Your Love cover. And they did a lot of kind of interesting covers. They did the Sabbath Changes cover. There's the Wire cover that you were kind of talking about before. Obviously the
Scratch.
Ted Nugent cover. Yeah, exactly.
Motor City Madman.
Yes, indeed. And, you know, to me, this is the true nod to the Power Trio. And, you know, it's a great ending noise feedback sort of stuff. And where they really were kind of drawing from was Sonic Youth. And Alex is going to speak one last time about another influence for Hate Songs, and in particular Daydream Nation and a band like Sonic Youth. And we played Sonic Youth on the Neurosis episode and talked a little bit about them there. Mm-hmm. And we know that Thurston is pretty interested in extreme metal to some extent, and has like a pretty good feel for kind of noise dimensions and you know,
especially black metal.
Yeah. He really likes kind of chaos.
He published the Mayhem Files book that Necro Butcher did.
Yep. That's a really interesting book. He also, I think he has a black metal side project of some sort. I
actually did it was half the dudes from Knock Mystium.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah,
because I actually drew him for Decibel.
For Decibel, that's right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So So we're gonna hear Total Trash, and the kind of really the midsection and end of that song really go into a famous Sonic Youth kind of freak out moment. Yeah, and you'll hear that with Sunshine of Your Love, which kind of takes the original Cream song and just kind of runs off in a very Fudge Tunnel-esque direction indeed. And
so it's Ginger Baker, is it Jack Bruce?
Jack Bruce, yep.
Jack Bruce and Mr. Clapton himself.
Mr. Clapton, yep. And what's funny is, in a weird way, Clapton was probably the third best musician in that band.
I would agree.
Mike will tell you that Jack Bruce was like one of the, he's up there with John Entwistle from The Who in terms of being like a bass player in rock in the 60s.
And a great vocalist too.
Yeah, for fantastic vocalist. And then Ginger is obviously
he's
incredible
a world of his own. Yeah.
Yep, incredible.
Watch the what the hell is that called? The something Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I've heard. I don't
Mr. Baker or something.
But I know of it. I know of it for sure.
It's quite good.
Awesome. Good stuff. One other patron I forgot to sort of mention in the last episode, and he actually wrote us a letter, which kind of reminded me. I mentioned Christian Grillet and Matthew Holland, but 2 days before Matthew Holland signed up, Jordan Bondo sort of signed up to become a patron. And so he actually wrote us on the patron website, and he said, I'm about halfway through the Edge of Sanity episode, but I'm loving it. I love pretty much everything Dan's done, and I'm really enjoying listening to his audio clips. I've only listened to the first part of the Best of two-parter, but Unto Others and Stormkeep are two of my favorite albums right now. So cool. For people that don't know, we did a two-part Best of 2021 for
it's kind of a coming back to. We hadn't done one of those in quite some time.
Yeah, it'd been a little while. We kind of got caught up in the Doom thing because that was drawing a lot of attention and stuff. So yeah, so it was kind of fun to talk about. Yeah, newer bands for a time.
Yeah.
He says I've listened to both of them probably a dozen times each. And he's talking about Unto Others and Stormkeep. They both just hit all the right things for me. The Chasm was fantastic. I didn't really care for the earlier stuff all that much. Not that I disliked it. They're albums I'd listened to once or twice, but the later albums are right up my alley. I even sent The Mission Arrival to Hopeless Shores to a friend of mine I used to be in a band with because it reminded me so much of the songs we used to write, a bajillion riffs that are all over the place. Even the song titles reminded me of how we named our songs. I have some not super great rehearsal recordings of it I should figure out how to share with you guys. We started recording our scratch tracks done, but we never got final cuts or vocals done for it, unfortunately. I think I speak for the rest of us when I say we're not worried about a ton of Patreon-only content. The main feed is plenty, and we just want to support you guys, so you keep doing what you're doing. Hey, thank you. We will.
Love to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And, if you want to become a patron, certainly you can go to patreon.com/Requiem podcast, or you can go to requiemmetal.com, our website, and click on the patron link, and it'll take you right to our Patreon page. $1, $2, $5, $10. You can be an all-star. We have a few that do 15 if you really believe in what we're doing. We've been really dropping 3 to 4 hour long episodes every couple of weeks, some even pushing towards like 5 hours, so it's a lot of content for your buck.
I think we've been almost doing it's like 5 is on the low end.
Yeah, we've done a couple. The Misfits and Dead Kennedys got pretty extreme, but yeah, we're definitely kind of nearing that.
Just saying, it was probably about 5.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's true.
So these are like especially if you're like a long haul trucker or somebody who travels a lot, like this might be your favorite new show.
That might be our really target audience. Is we really should have gotten in on that whole truckers rally and trying to do some kind of cross promotional kind of weird.
Hey guys, you got to drive 14 hours in a day. We got 2 shows for you.
We're here for you. We're here
every week. You get a new show that's can get you from Michigan to
Denver,
Mississippi or something.
Mississippi, yeah. So. Another patron, Vox Adams, wrote us and said, never listened to The Chasm before, and I chugged through all 7 hours of that 2-part show. He says, I haven't stopped rocking them since. They have become a regular part of my metal rotation.
That's great to hear.
It's pretty cool. Some other flipping through here. No. Let's see. Linus Hogland said, I'm only an hour in. He's talking about the Edge of Sanity. He says, but earlier you did mention that Benny was a jazz drummer. Maybe that is why he, as far as I know, never used the double bass drums on any recordings. That has got to be quite unique in the death metal scene. Or am I mistaken here? ? He said, also, Finspång, where they are from, is about 200 kilometers from Stockholm, so about a 3-hour train ride or drive. It's a small, old, industrialized city that is quite isolated. So I think Linus is from Sweden, so thank you for that insight.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that. And this is from Seth, who writes in pretty regularly, Seth Forsgreen, or Forsman. He says, I just wrapped up part 2 of The Chasm tonight. I had seen this band's name on lists and had heard them in death metal discussions for a long time, but knew nothing about them, their geographic origin, or what they sounded like. In my mind, the name The Chasm always just blended in with a sea of hundreds of other like-minded death metal bands out there that I would never listen to. Yeah, exactly. And even if I did, never remember. If you break down all the metal genres coarsely into just traditional black doom and death, I personally put death metal hovering around 3rd or 4th place in terms of metal and extreme music that obsesses me and keeps my attention. Death metal is a magic eye book for the ears. Sometimes you can listen to the squalor for hours and just end up annoyed that you wasted your time on something you feel like you have heard 1,000 times before, and other times you will start to see the shapes forming and the pathways appearing at your feet. I love these deep dives into bands like The Chasm because it's just like a guide into the fucking cursed temple. Jason and Mark beckoning with torches to follow them into the album, or into the chasm. He wrote ... chasm to explore the depths and roots and structure of these bands that would normally, I lost a little part apparently. Normally we'll start to see the shapes forming and the pathways appearing at your feet. Oh, I'm sorry. I got it. Okay. It's when I screenshot 2 things and I got to pick up right where I'm at. So yeah, beckoning with torches to follow them into the chasm to explore the depths and root structure of these bands that would normally breeze right past me. What I usually do with these episodes is only listen to the talk sets the first time and fast forward through the tunes. This way the anticipation builds, and for me, and finally hear this band that these 2 people went to and the trouble to research. Always delivered in dizzying detail, yet casual and relaxed, like a friend who comes over to help you fix your furnace without making fun of you for not knowing how to fix a furnace. I still haven't quite latched with The Chasm, but as usual, this episode gave me a reason to stare at the blur a little longer and maybe just adjust my ears and walk into the darkness without my torch.
That may be one of the most interesting descriptions I've ever
heard.
It
is pretty fascinating.
Your buddy coming over to help you fix your furnace. That's very specific, but it also evocative.
So I've got one more, and it's an epic one, and it's from the great Andreas, our sort of ultimate patron.
Brother in both roar.
Yes. And this one's on the Misfits, and he tells some stories here. So this will be his own little mini sort of novel. So it took me 3 sessions, but I just finished listening to another magnificent episode. You guys are so insanely good at what you do that I've run out of original compliments. Now into my history with the Misfits that ends with a cool anecdote. I knew who the Misfits were since I was 12 or 13. They're huge in Spain, and a bunch of people wore their T-shirts. However, I was a full-on metalhead and wouldn't give them the time of day to those punks that didn't know how to play. A little bit after turning 15, I started to frequent the biggest metal bar in my town. Legal age in Spain was 16, but back then nobody cared about it. A few months later, and after becoming somewhat friendly with the owner, I started to DJ on the weekends. The asshole refused to pay for the job, so nobody with half a brain cell would do it. He'd simply put a record on and let it play through. Back then, I lacked that half a brain cell, so I asked if I could be the DJ of the house, to which he agreed. A couple blocks away, there was a punk new wave goth bar whose DJ was an absolute prick who despised metalheads with every fiber of his being. I feel like I know these people that he's talking about. He's really setting up the characters well. There was a third bar close by. Oh, third bar. This is kind of cool. Third bar close by that opened a couple hours before all the music ones did, and we used to coincide there. Every time he saw me, his greeting was, "Hello, brain dead heavy." In Spain, metalheads are called heavies.
Oh.
He would then proceed to tell everyone who wanted to hear how insanely stupid, linear, and unsophisticated heavy metal fans were. I always ignored him and wouldn't engage, but one day everything changed. Are you guys familiar with that meme that shows a punk and a metalhead sitting on a couch with every one of them naming a band they love, completely ignoring what the other guy says until at the end of it, one of them says Motorhead and then the other one asks Motorhead, and they end up high-fiving each other? Well, that's exactly what happened with this asshole and I. One day he started to talk about Motorhead. I responded something on the lines that I was surprised to hear he actually liked a good band, and the rest is history. We ended up becoming best friends and still stay in touch 35 years later. This guy was a Misfits, Samhain, Danzig fanatic, and he introduced me to the world of punk, hardcore, crossover, etc. A fun sideline I ended up getting under his super hot sister's sheets, because one day she heard me say I love Bob Dylan songs when other people played them but couldn't stand listening to them. She had always thought the same, and that comment granted me access to her bed. Whoa, thank you, Andreas, for that. Now for the cool anecdote. All right, so here's the true story. December 26, 2017, my ex-wife and I go to Vegas to spend New Year's Eve there. As we are walking out of the airport, I see a billboard announcing an original Misfits show at the MGM, with the added treat for me that Dave Lombardo will be at the drum kit. The day of the show, I kill time playing blackjack while waiting for the doors to open. Sitting next to me, there's a guy wearing a Slayer t-shirt, and I tell him that one of the coolest things about the show for me is that I will finally see Lombardo playing live. Did I read this story?
No, I don't recognize it.
Okay, God, I'm having like deja vu, but maybe it's when I first read this email, I was like, did I read this in like the Edge of Sanity? I don't know. I have these moments. The guy in the Slayer shirt says he's, and they're talking about getting to finally see Lombardo play live. He smiles, asks me if I'm a Slayer fan, and I tell him they're one of my favorite ones, and Lombardo, my favorite drummer, and that if I had known about the show in advance without having had plans for my trip, I would have flown from Alaska to Las Vegas anyways. After confirming my admiration for Dave, the guy goes ahead and tells me he's actually Lombardo's drum tech. He asks in what section of the arena I'll be. I happen to have tickets for the section closest to the stage on the left side of it, and he tells me to look for him after the show to see if maybe I can shake hands with his boss. The concert was great, and I also have to disagree with Blake's comment about Lombardo not fitting well with the band. I am no musical expert, but my impression was that he killed those songs. And in fact, at one point during the show, Danzig mentioned how incredibly good he was, told the story of how they met during a Danzig Slayer tour, and the audience showered Lombardo with a long ovation. The show ends. It is worth mentioning that everyone had to leave their cell phones at the entrance, which means that, unfortunately, I don't have photographic evidence of my story. I stay in my spot waiting to see the drum tech. I am all by myself except for another who's a few feet away from me, when all of a sudden Jerry Only, who is on stage apparently directing the roadies what to do with the equipment, looks in our direction, leaves the stage, and approaches us with a huge smile on his face. When he gets where we're at, he gives us a long, squeezy hug, thanks us for coming to the show, and we start talking. He asks me where I'm coming from. I tell him from Alaska, and he proceeds to ask me a lot of questions. We talked for over 30 minutes. He answered and asked questions. He said he couldn't believe they were playing together again, that the Misfits meant everything to him, and he was incredibly friendly, grateful for having played the show in general, and to us in particular for having attended. I fell in love with the guy. I have had a handful of encounters with people in his position, and nobody has ever been so nice and cool. When he was about to leave, he asked if any of us would be attending their next show, which I believe was scheduled for a few months later in New Jersey. I told him that it wasn't impossible that I would, that if it wasn't impossible that I would. At that point, he calls one of the people working on the stage, and when he came up to us, he told him to remember my face, and that if I showed up at that show to bring me to the VIP zone. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it for personal reasons, but I would have loved to. The only evidence I have of this story is an autographed ticket, which I believe is one of only 2 autographs Jerry signed that day.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool. Pretty nice.
Andreas lives in Alaska?
Yeah. Yep. So I'll always get messages from him at like weird time zones, because he's like,
where at in Alaska, do you know?
I do not know. He's probably told me before, but I kind of forgot. So yeah, Andreas, give us a shout out after you hear this and let us know where you're at.
I've never been to Alaska. Yeah. If you got it'd be a cool place to visit.
For sure. Yeah. My mom and stepdad have been up there, and my stepdad's been there quite a few times. He actually camped up there a few times. So he almost died in Alaska, like kind of one of those, like,
Jesus.
like him and his buddy kind of got like trapped in the wilderness, like Yellow Jackets kind of style. Like I don't know. I'm trying to remember how they got rescued.
Buddy's leg.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish. No, I think a rescue helicopter of some sort like found them, or they got like a message. But this is like in the the 80s, so like
rescue helicopters is how they get their mail. So
yeah, exactly. Some pretty crazy stuff. But yeah, so if you want to get us a message or give us some feedback on the Chasm, Edge of Sanity, any of the stuff that you're kind of catching up on. We on occasion will hear from people checking out our old episodes, which is great. And if you want to check out any of the episodes that aren't in the feed, the first 160, you can go to requiemmetal.com, and that's where you'll find all those. And if you want to leave us a comment, you can shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. You can leave us comments on Facebook, Jason and Mark, Instagram, and of course Twitter as well. So if you think what we're doing has some value, we really would love most of those people that we just read letters from are patrons, and they're in an exclusive group that we have on Facebook where they talk to each other and share a lot of thoughts. And it's a nice little, it's like being a VIP club a little bit. So if you want to be in the VIP club and you think that what we did, all this research, all this kind of putting together stuff is worth a cup of coffee a month, hey, I'm pretty happy about that.
It's less than a super value meal now. So
yeah.
With inflation, like this is a hell of a bargain.
Yep. We have not inflated our patron. We could add like the cost of living factor or whatever, but
at the $20 a month one.
There you go. So yeah, so we do appreciate all the people that have kind of been signing up to become patrons, and all of our people that have kind of stuck with us through the years as patrons and stuff too. So we're going to ride out the spring here into the summer with the next few episodes. And then hopefully kind of once I get back from overseas, I'll be in Italy a little bit in June. I think we'll probably start putting the touches on our next kind of big series. We'll start to kind of get some of that mapped out. I know people are kind of excited to see what we do after we did the American Thrash series and then the American Doom series that we did last year. So
now we're kind of doing a little revisionist.
Yeah, we're just kind of
whatever.
Yeah, we're just flexing our muscles, looking into some areas we haven't looked into, revisiting Edge of Sanity. There's another revisit that we're kind of putting some pieces on. Although the interview that we're going to get from someone for that person's band is currently on tour, and so he had to kind of put a pause on that. I haven't told Mark about that, but
I can surmise who that might be.
Yeah, I think Mark knows who I'm talking about. So yeah. So anyways, we're putting some things together, but maybe by the time this episode goes up, the second part we'll be at Maryland Death Fest in a couple weeks, won't we? Probably after part 1 of Fudge Tunnel. Shit, that's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, part 1's going to come out in, when's that going to be? Today's Tuesday, May 10th, the weekend.
Yeah.
Monday. So, yeah, there's lots of stuff happening. Be at Psycho Las Vegas.
We'll be at Psycho Las Vegas, too. If you're at Maryland Death Fest and you're a patron or a fan of the show, let us know. We'll meet up, have a
Edison Lot is a great place to be. We're only doing Edison Lot shows, so I'm not going to go to the whatever the hell the other thing is. I don't need to deal with that kind of business.
Is that what like a bunch of the grind bands are and stuff?
Well, there's two other. There's the place where we saw like Kraft, and what the hell is the other place called? There's the Edison Lot. There's the smaller one that's the grindcore thing, and then there's the other thing that I can't think of right now.
The other thing,
there's like pillars everywhere where you can't see anybody.
Okay, got it. Yeah, it seems like most of the bands I want to see are just on like 2 stages. I feel like.
Yeah, I just got Edison Lot tickets.
Okay.
So we'll be able to see.
Sadly, not Dismember.
No Dismember. No Bloodbath. I've already seen Bloodbath though. That's fine.
I have too, but Dismember was like that was.
I saw Dismember back in I think '93.
Never seen him.
It was the last time. I have Fred Etzby's phone number. I've texted him before, but big difference between that and seeing him live. But we'll see him at some point.
Yep, I'm hoping. And we know about Mark and I we've talked for years about the last of the sort of the classic metal bands that we still haven't seen is Scorpions. And I think it's going to happen this summer too. I'm pretty pumped.
I got a hold of the PR people.
Yeah.
I'll say this on the air. He's like, yeah, get a hold of me one that's closer because it's in August.
Awesome.
So we could potentially be on the guest list, but I don't think that's going to give us any better tickets, better seats.
Yeah.
We just won't have to pay for them.
That's true. I'm okay with that too, if that's what we got to do.
But that's seriously, Scorpions is one of the last bands I really, really want to see. That's kind of
that could be at an end, soon. We got to
these dudes are in their 70s. It's like, how much longer can you go? And Whitesnake, it's their farewell tour.
Which we've seen Whitesnake lots of
times or something.
I know. They're old standard at DTE for us. So
he's going to be so happy it's called Pine Knob again.
I know. He always makes that joke. So
any kind of dick jokes with
man. Mr.
Coverdale is always a good day.
If I was black, we'd be called Black Snake, baby. He's like a real life Austin Powers. That's what
follow him on YouTube.
Oh, I do. He's great. I follow him on Twitter. He's pretty fun on Twitter.
Yeah, he's a hell of a fun guy. He's selling his house in Lake Tahoe. If you're interested,
that's very sad. Yeah, I'll look into it. I sell my CD collection. I can.
Yeah, you got $1 million to blow, right?
I can make a down payment on like his boathouse or something.
Sure.
So. Cool. Well, we are closing out with some noise. We got Sonic Youth from Daydream Nation, Total Trash. And then we're closing out with Sunshine of Your Love. Hopefully you have enjoyed our foray into the, not just Fudge Tunnel, but the bands that sort of made up Fudge Tunnel and the pieces and all of that. So thank you to all the contributing members. And again, if you want to hear more from those kind of sound clips of Alex talking about the influences, check out Tidal. And, if you want to subscribe to that service and check out the whole 48 song curation that he does there. And I think you won't be disappointed. So, so for Sunshine of Your Love and Fudge Tunnel, I am Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Enjoy.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, it was all fairly amicable. We'd just come to the end of the road and had stopped enjoying doing the band in the way that we used to. We felt that creatively we'd said all we wanted to say, and none of us liked touring and being away from home and all the privations of touring. And none of us, for some reason around then, made much of an effort to enjoy touring. We'd be much more likely to kind of wallow in our own misery and just grit our teeth and get through it than try to find things to enjoy about it. We all like playing live, still do, but it's the other sort of 23 hours in the day that are a pain in the ass when you're touring, and plus the ball ache of working with earache, that was a factor as well, I think.
Pretty sure that all three of us in the band loved Sonic Youth, and I'm pretty sure you can hear that all over Hate Songs, but in particular the ending of this song, they sort of create this guitar soundscape that just goes on and on and on in a beautiful way. I think that's pretty much also a big influence on the end of Sunshine of Your Love. That guitar freak out thing is quite Sonic Youth.
It's more than a game. Can't take it away. Can't kill out the shame. It's a guilty man that can grease the crack. It's total trash. Slap him on the back with a heavy rock.